I had seen a control panel and I was looking like, oh, what's this? And as soon as I started staring, a wall of white light passed in front of it, preventing me from seeing the control panel anymore. And they said, don't look at that.
Aspen Roots.
Lisa Nelson, healing touch practitioner, Barbara Brennan, healing science practitioner, and author of Earth's Secret Visitors. Are they here to help us? Welcome to the Aspen Roots podcast.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you today.
Yes, Lisa, we're so excited to have you today. And her book, I'm showing it here for those on video, is amazing. I mean, we can't highlight all the stories here today, but we're going to hit some pretty heavy hitters. And it's funny because when we were talking about the intro to this podcast, this song dropped in, the things that make you go, and we're going to talk all about those kind of things here today. Lisa had 15 years of experience with extraterrestrials who called themselves the Guardians. And the main character in this book, Rob, was Lisa's boyfriend. So we're going to hear all about Rob and his double life. So Lisa, if you want to kick us off with who Rob is and his holograms, I think that'd be a good starting place.
That'll be a good foundation to begin to elaborate on the high strangeness. From around 1975 to around 1990, I had 15 years of continuous contact with interdimensionals or extraterrestrials. There are questions today about whether things come from the future of humanity and are terrestrial or whether they do come from great distances. In this situation, I began to date a young man that I had had my eye on with a crush for a couple years. And eventually he noticed me and we began to date. And I was pretty happy about that. As Rob and I began to date, I was a sophomore in high school and I was just going on 15 at the time. In the months that ensued, he began to tell me about beginning to work with these beings that he referred to as the guardians. He told me that they were earth protectors and that they wanted him to work with them. So again, since we were high school kids, I was wondering what they would want with him. I was wondering if he was making it all up, and I was full of doubt, but I was also full of wonder. So I was of two minds on this situation. As the months passed, he began to illustrate to me that he was beginning to have an association where he would be working with them and that he would be doing calculations for them. But he began to tell me that I had to get ready to begin to interact with what he called holograms. And he said that what was happening originally was that they were picking him up from his room at night and taking him up to a ship and putting him back the following morning, but he was going to be going up there more often. And sometimes I would have to walk to school with a hologram. And he described this as a computer generated projection that would look exactly like him and have a suggestion with it where if you touched it, you would get the feeling of solidness and warmth that was a suggestion to the observer that that was what they were seeing. So there was an element of mind suggestion with this. I was very skeptical, and the first time it happened really startled me because when it happened, he said, I'm going to go up now. And he snapped his fingers and told me that he would always snap his fingers when he was going, but he would be instantly replaced with a hologram and I'd be able to tell the difference. So the first time that happened, it was so startlingly different that it was like suddenly being in the presence of a robot. And if you had seen Terminator, you might have thought that it was like Arnold Schwarzenegger playing a robot. But he could not have gotten that idea from that movie because it was years before that movie came out. So I began to have these interactions with these so-called projections where he would be instantaneously switched out, lifted, and faster than the eye could see, replaced with a hologram, and they would tell me things about what he did. They began to tell me things about his history, that he really was not a young boy, that he was a very ancient being and had worked with the Guardians for eons, and that his life here in our neighborhood was fairly contrived in that he was set up with a background family and that he was living as a very, very old being in the appearance of a young man.
Is it fair to say that the hologram that came down was like AI? It had a whole personality and knowledge, and we could put concepts together and speak. Would you call it what we consider to be AI today?
It was said to be programmed. It was said to have enough knowledge about his personality to act like him, and it had language and mental faculties, so to speak. So you could call it artificial intelligence because it was described as a projection. Holographic technology is a little different because the intelligence of holographic is more of a visual projection, and it has to be projected from different angles for it to come together to give you a three-dimensional image, is my understanding of it. AI is not three-dimensional yet.
Right.
If it does become three-dimensional, then it may be blended with holographic technology.
Okay, I see.
And I
Okay.
talk about that a little bit in the book because I looked into the state of holograph. It was a budding technology at the time, and it was still pretty rudimentary.
So, if you could tell the difference, what about the people in school, though? Did anyone else know that he had changed into a different form?
He looked the same, and in general, I would say that he behaved like a big clown. So, number two was the iteration of the first hologram. There were sequential developments through the years until we got to number 10. And initially, it was very steely, very unfriendly towards me. I didn't like it. Grabbed my hand too hard. Sometimes it would put on a sort of show in the hallway of kissing me, and it would be hard and unpleasant. And I was like, ew, and not liking it at all. It was very crude. And around other kids, there was a lot of monkeying around on its part,
Okay.
acting out Monty Python characters. So it
Okay.
was being entertaining and being very goofy, but not being of any kind of depth.
Yeah.
So if you recall high school, unless you went to a very sophisticated high school that wasn't a public school, the halls are pretty raucous. And if you're on an athletic team, boys are very boisterous. In class, you're just sitting quietly being instructed by your teacher. So they would tell me that the programming was still pretty crude and that it was going to be improved. There tended to be issues with different holograms, and they would get canned and another version brought out. So first two didn't actually last very long because it really upset me. They got better over time until it was possible to really pull the wool over my eyes. And that was the point in my life when I began to really feel into whether I was feeling essence.
Mm.
Could you tell that it wasn't a human body, or did it feel completely human with like movable flesh that was warm and saliva and all that?
It had biological features that would have been fairly undetectable. For example, warmth, the feeling of skin. A kiss is a very intimate thing and very personal, and that was one of the things that told me that he couldn't be faking it. I don't believe
Wow.
that anyone else can fake another person's kiss, for example, but there are signs where you know, no way is that him.
What a tremendous experience to be having with your childhood significant other. You're 15 and you just want to date this good-looking popular kid, and then you get hit with all this. So that is just a lot to take in. Continue, please.
It was a lot to take in, and my diary, which I had begun to write in years earlier, was one of those little books with a little lock and key on it, and it had about 5 lines, about 4 inches long for each daily entry. And really, all you should have wrote in is, "Today I went to the swimming pool," but I was writing everything down.
Mm.
Everything. And I was writing so small that it was almost like microfiche. I didn't believe that anybody could read it because I could write so tiny. So I was writing very, very tiny in my diary, and every night it was getting to be more and more fascinating because they were talking to me about how he had gotten to where he had to live on Earth, which had been a story about how he had lived on a different planet in a society where their immunity had taken a dip because they didn't need their immunity anymore because they had conquered all disease. But eventually, disease had been leaked into their society and everybody died. And he
Wow.
had been away at the
Wow.
time and he had to find a planet where he could live with the atmosphere was comparable. So it was said that he had to live on this planet and had lived on this planet at other points in time during other eras because his planet had been gone. So there was an air of loneliness about him and an air of grief and loss with him that I always felt with him. So that was part
Mm.
of his essence.
I have a question too. So you're saying he didn't live and die, he was continuing on, just in a different body kind of thing, but he did he not die or how did that work? He just was put into another body?
They were talking about him having an ability to regenerate repeatedly. And they didn't go into a lot of information about how exactly that occurred, but they had talked about him having an ability to restore his vitality and continue on, but he would go away for a while and then come back. And at the time, reincarnation was not spoken of very much. So I didn't have the questions that I would have had this day and age, where you
Hmm.
say, did you go back to the other side? Did you plan another life? Did you get new parents? Like
Right.
we would if we knew about the path work. And I was in a state of wonder quite a bit of the time because there were so many concepts that were not talked about anywhere yet
Hmm.
in our society because we hadn't had ET, the extraterrestrial, we hadn't had close encounters. The only thing that there was Star Trek. Anyway, I had been writing in my diary and I had been getting messages from the holograms. Don't talk about this to anybody. You'll get in big trouble. Authorities will come and get you and interrogate you. You need to keep this quiet. If you tell your parents, they're going to take you to a shrink. They're going to put you on medication. It will not be good if you talk about it. So I was writing it down almost as if it was my friend to have somebody to tell it to.
Hmm.
And then Rob was beginning to do missions. And one day after dinner, I was washing the dishes and the phone rang and I got on the phone and I was suddenly being yelled at. The message was, "This is number two. And do you know what you've done? You've caused a lot of trouble writing everything down in your diary. Do you even know where
Wow.
that thing is?" And I was like, they know about it.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I put the phone down, which was a landline, not a cell phone. So it was attached to the wall. I ran into my bedroom and started thrashing through my secret hiding place. It wasn't there. I looked everywhere in my room trying to find it. It was not in my room. And I went back to the phone. They said, "Stop writing this stuff down. We monitor you. We know everything you do, and you can't be writing it down." Well, I was stunned because this phone call came in Rob's voice. And I thought for a moment, well, let me run over to Rob's house. He was about a block and a half away. I ran out my house to go run over there because I had been hung up on and I dialed back and the phone was busy. So I said, let me run over and see if I can fix this. And he was walking up to my house and he was holding my diary in his hand. It was mangled. And he said, "I got your diary back for you.
Wow.
Please don't
Wow.
write this stuff down. If they find out about me, I'll have to leave and we'll be broken up."
Wow.
And the
Jeez.
thing that really startled me was he could not have been at his house on the phone yelling at me if he wanted to pretend to be a hologram. It takes too long to get from his house to my house to be where he was, which was just on the street coming up to my house as I ran
Wow.
out the door. And that's when I said, "Oh my God, somebody was talking to me on the phone in Rob's voice, and Rob wasn't at his house. He was on his way to my house."
So if you had any doubt, you didn't at that point. You're like, this shit's definitely real.
This
Yeah.
I was stunned, I was upset, partly because now I knew that I couldn't have any secrets. They had
Mm.
abilities to know things that I considered my privacy. My innermost thoughts had been in that diary, and I was beginning to realize that this technology was far beyond anything that you could predict. In human terms, we were still on landlines. There were no cell phones yet. So I was stunned and I had a lot to think about at that point in time.
Stunned and upset, but were you also fearful at that point?
I was a little afraid in terms of the ability for them to remove something from my home without anybody going in and physically taking it because my family was home that day.
That's what I was going to ask. Is there any chance someone could have gotten in there?
We lived in a small house and it was a weekend and the family was home. And I thought about that, like, how could he have gotten in there and gotten it? Gotten all the way into the bedroom in the end of the house. There's no way he could have gotten in there. There would have had to have been some ransacking to find it because it was well hidden. And
Mm.
my sister was hanging out in the room most of the day.
Okay. So,
Yeah, I put a lot of thought into that. Like, how could somebody
yeah.
pull that off? And I couldn't come up with a way he could have gotten in the house uninvited, gotten in with the family home on the weekend with my sister hanging out in the bedroom. And I was very careful about where I kept it because it's my secrets.
Yeah.
So that was very startling to me. And I decided that I needed more proof because my mind was like, oh, that's crazy. Maybe
Yeah.
there's some explanation for this. So I started to say, I want to see a spaceship. And the answer that I was getting, either from the holograms or from Rob, was you can't see a spaceship because it'll freak you out. And I'm like, well, you're telling me all this stuff. I kind of think I can handle it.
I'm already
Yeah, right.
freaked out.
Yeah.
Right? I'm already freaked out. Help me be less freaked out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I started saying, can you take me on a spaceship? I wanted to go on a spaceship. Well, it was about another year later, Rob had begun to do missions. So they were talking to me about other planetary societies, the type of missions that were going on, the types of technology that they had. And I was getting used to this idea of different holograms being generated. They were getting to be more advanced with different iterations. And I was hearing a lot of stories. He was introducing music to me that they were saying was given to recording artists to give ideas to Earth about other worlds.
Wow. That's super cool. Because if you think back to that time, there was some great music. Definitely.
Great music. We had particular artists who were singing quite a bit about traversing other worlds. Yes was one of them. David Bowie was one of them. Roger Dean was doing unbelievable album cover art. There were other artists. Uriah Heep, for example, would talk about being a space warrior and being a very lonely guy, being out on a mission, and he wanted to come home and see his girlfriend, kind of thing. And they would take me, either Rob or a hologram would take me to a record store and flip through albums and go, this music was played on a ship, and we gave the music to the artist to bring it to Earth. And they
Wow.
would talk about concerts on the ship. The ships were very, very large that they would talk about. They would say that some of the ships that they had would hold as many people as were in my town. And at the time, the town of Downers Grove had about 35,000 people. They
Wow.
they would talk about performers that they had there. So there is an episode with Alona, which actually she came down to visit me at one point, and we'll leave the reader to look into that one. But she was a performer, and they would talk about different recordings that were done and given to artists to bring ideas to Earth, as well as the art. And there was a lot of brewing up of a lot of fascination with other worlds, other planets.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, there was more sightings of UFOs. And at the time, Chicago was very active in terms of UFO sightings. It was one of the most active areas in the country for UFO sightings during these exact years. But it happened that after about a year, I was asleep in my bed and I became aware of an approaching sound, the rumble of helicopters in formation coming towards my house, and it woke me up. It was loud enough as it came closer and closer. And I was listening to it going, why are so many helicopters in the sky? It's the middle of the night. What's going on? And it got so close that I couldn't understand why my whole family wasn't awake and nobody woke up.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, a formation of helicopters came over the front yard and stopped traveling. They just hovered over the front yard, and there were very bright lights coming in. And I became aware that I was asleep, but also awake. And I thought that was a very strange combination of awareness to be in, and light was streaming in the window. And I was thinking, why don't mom and dad wake up? Why
Mm-hmm.
why aren't they checking this out? Why is everybody so hard asleep? And I got up out of my bed. I slowly walked through the living room and went into the front yard and realized that I was looking up at the bottom of a giant craft. And as soon as I came
Wow.
out the front yard, all of the helicopters left and left me underneath a craft that was so large that it covered the sky, including the backyard of the neighbor across the street from us. And that was a deep backyard. It was big enough to have a little baseball field in it. It was
Wow.
big.
Wow.
And I'm looking at it, and there's a soft hum and a few little cobalt blue lights on the side of the craft, a few little red blinking dots, and I'm looking at it going, wow. And it was
Wow.
very softly humming, and the next thing I knew, I was on my hands and knees looking down at the roof of my house. I was kneeling on a bowl-shaped curve, which was looked like a window to me at the time, but I was kneeling on it, looking at the tiles on the top of the house that I had just been inside of. I could see the top
Whoa.
of the tallest tree in our
Wow.
yard, and I'm looking down at this, and somebody says to me, "Stand up." And as I heard this voice say, "Stand up" to me, the clear window turned metallic. Nothing
Hmm.
closed, nothing moved. It just went from being completely clear to being completely metallic and opaque. And as I turned around, I was still on my tush, and I saw a very tall person who looked like he was dressed as a dentist with a like a doctor coat on, and he had a very loopy wig on, which didn't look right to me. It looked like he was trying to look friendly, but it almost seemed like a clown wig. And I'm like, what is this? And there's a fixed smile on the face, and I am going, what's this? And I'm standing up by now. I must have done it without really thinking about it. But they said, we want to talk to you. We have a question for you. And I noticed that when spoken to, the mouth of the being did not move at all. The mouth was
Hmm.
fixed. So I knew something was weird here and said, we're going to ask you a question. And I felt the question being asked, although I didn't hear it in terms of language. I just knew there was a query, something going into my mind. And I said, let me answer it. And the answer was, no, we'll get it because you'll convolute the answer. And I felt my mind
Wow.
being shuffled through by like a Rolodex or like flipping through files in a file cabinet, but it was
Wow.
a spinning sort of feeling. And I was like, hey, stop. And I felt them get the answer, withdraw. And I was like, hey, that's my brain there, you know?
Yeah.
And I struggled against it a little bit, but they said, okay, now we want to show you something. Come over here. And I had seen more of this ship where I had seen a control panel and I was looking like, oh, what's this? And as soon as I started staring, a wall of white light passed in front of it, preventing me from seeing the control panel anymore. And they said, don't look at that.
Wow.
Wow.
It was almost like lightning white light, platinum. So they prevented me from looking at it. And I was like, oh, I was going to memorize that. And they had me walk a little to the left, and a tabletop materialized floating in the air. It was about the size
What?
of a
So
desk.
cool.
It just came into view, no legs on it. It was just levitating. And as they walked me over to it, glyphs, which are like Egyptian symbols, rose up out of the flat surface of this desktop and were either ruby red or cobalt blue. And they were in rows. And the tall one now had five little guys behind him that were only about as high up as his hip. And they had like monk clothes on them, almost like burlap sack tops with a rope belt, and had egg-shaped heads and big brown eyes, and I couldn't see a mouth, and stick arms. And I had never seen anything like that, but
Huh.
they were kind of cowering behind the tall guy with the loopy wig that didn't look right. And
Wow.
I got the impression that they were trying to be invisible, but I still saw them, but they were like hanging back. And the tall guy said, read these and tell us which one is you. And as I looked at each symbol, each one resonated with my inner knowledge, and I had an awareness of what each one of those symbols meant. And either it didn't match me at all, kind of matched me, but eventually I found one that was like, oh, this is me. And I pointed to that one, and I got some sort of approval from the tall one. And in that moment, a stream of light went into my pupil, and I was watching probably what may have been hundreds, if not thousands, of images of things from the contents of my brain, stuff that looked like sacred geometry, stuff that looked like code, stuff that looked like I couldn't even tell you what, and
Wow.
even things that I had dreamt about when I was much younger. Say I was
Whoa.
3 or 4 years old, and I became aware that there was an ability to have a file of all of the contents of my mind. I was being
Wow.
reminded of things that I had completely forgotten from when I was a very tiny child.
That's
It
incredible.
was all
Yeah.
in this stream, and it went into my eye for a while, and I was like, I hope I can remember this. And I made a like a promise, remember this, you have to remember this. This is
Yeah.
so amazing. I want to remember what all those symbols meant and what appeared to maybe be sacred geometry or designs of sorts. And that was about the end of the interaction as far as I am able to recall, but I found myself back in my bed and the words came to me, I'm awake but asleep. And then I was asleep. So there, it seemed like there was some opening suggestion and then a closing suggestion to the
Huh.
whole episode where I was in my bed going, hey, wait a minute, I was sleeping, but I'm up. And then it was, but now I'm asleep. And the next day, I was very strangely calm about it. Rob and I never talked about it, but in me, there was a definite quiet wow that said, I've been on a ship.
Wow.
And that was beyond anything I could have planned on.
That is mind blowing.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about how you had to memorize that because at that point you knew you couldn't go write it in your diary, right?
No,
Right. Yeah.
No, I couldn't. And
Man.
my mind became what I thought was my secret space. And memorizing and remembering was the thing that I thought that I was going to have. Even so, I still knew that they could go in and get stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't feel
Yeah.
like I had any ability. And there was an episode later where Rob came to me and he had this big reel of tape. And he said, "Here, I took these from the Guardians. They've been keeping tapes on you." And he gave
Wow.
me all this reel of it. It had been taken out of a reel, but it was this very, very thin, metallic looking tape. And he said, "This is what they had on you. I took it. Here, you should have it."
Hmm.
But they keep an eye on anyone who has contact with the Guardians. They know what everybody's doing that knows anything
Man.
about them because they have to know if anybody's talking.
Yeah.
Absolutely zero privacy.
Zero
Yeah.
privacy.
You got your wish, so I'm just curious, were you happy that you got your wish, or were you kind of like, okay, I don't want to do that again?
I was open to a different reality. There was a point in time later where there was a second UFO experience in my neighborhood, and this one was witnessed by quite a few people. And on the book cover, there is a artist rendering of it that I had done by a graphic artist. On this book cover, there's a lot in there, but that is actually a photo of Rob that was taken by Robert Hastings, who wrote UFOs and Nukes, with 167 military interviews with personnel who were on duty at the time of UFO incursions at bases where there was activities to do with nuclear war. But there was a point in time where Rob was angry at the Guardians because an interaction occurred with me and a being who came down in Rob's likeness that I ended up being upset about. And the following day, the hologram, which was up to iteration probably 10 by then, said, "We have to go for a walk. We got to talk." And they said, "Rob got very angry in a show of power. He has brought down a UFO into the neighborhood, and we have an emergency now because we can't have people seeing this going on so close to his home." They walked me back to the neighborhood, and what was occurring in this cover, there was a giant rectangle of unbelievably bright light that was hovering in the sky that was about the size of a World Trade Center tower. It had no openings on it that I could discern, but it looked like it was about 100 stories tall
Wow.
and was set back a bit from the house. So it might look from the artist rendering that it was over his head, but it was actually behind. And it was very brilliant. There was a nest of extremely dark purple clouds around it, but other than that, the sky was nearly cloudless. And that thing did not move for a very long time. People stood
Wow.
and looked at it and pointed at it for quite a while. After dinner time, it was a summer night and it was still sunny. The sun was getting towards the west, which was behind us, and then the dusk began to come. So that's why you see the stars in the higher part of the book because it's showing that evening is coming. But this thing was so big and so behemoth, and at least 10 of us in two groups were looking at it, pointing at it, and saying, "What is that? It
Yeah.
doesn't move like a satellite. It's just sitting there in the sky." And some people were debating about whether to call the news, call the newspapers. And I do have an interview in my book with a person who was able to describe it very clearly.
That's tremendous.
And
Yeah,
that
that's
was
so
another one
interesting.
that had quite a few witnesses to it.
Yeah, that element's really cool to have some witnesses. So you know you're not
Yeah.
making this up. You're not dreaming, you know.
Right. So this was around the years when I was getting into the early years of college. We did end up getting married after college. He continued to do calculations. I had convinced him to kind of get away from the Guardians and let us have a normal life. And I would only see a hologram once in a blue moon, but I know that they were still doing calculations and designing things. We did get married and moved to New York City because I wanted to pursue music. I was working now in the music business. This was the year that I met Christopher O'Brien, who is an author in paranormal research. So he became my first friend in New York.
Was that synchronistic? Like, how did you become friends? Did you seek him out because you had experience with extraterrestrials, or just did you happen to be friends and you both happen to kind of have this relation to extraterrestrials?
My first job in New York City, I have to wonder at the way I got that job because I wanted to work in a recording studio. I had been a music major. I started as a performance major and ended up in electronic composition. And I had decided that I wanted to be a recording artist, and the idea was to go to New York City where it's all going on, and I wanted to work in a recording studio. And I was looking on the back of all my albums to find out where were the recording studios. And I found the name Automated Studio Technologies. I called information to get the phone number from it because I didn't even have a phone book when I first moved to New York City. And I called up a place that turned out to be a pro audio retail sales, which meant the people who build recording studios and own recording studios would go to that company, Harvey Professional Audio on West 45th Street, to buy major pieces of equipment.
Okay.
And video was just beginning to happen. And I was very up on all the technology of the day. And I had called up, got an appointment, walked into that place and said, I would like to work in your recording studio. And a man's mouth dropped open and he was like, how'd you hear about us? We're just developing something. And they had no job posted anywhere. It was just that I showed up, said, I want to work here because I had seen a name on an album cover and it was actually referring to a studio in London.
Hmm.
Didn't know that. I was very naive. And the guy gave me a job, and it turned out to be where Christopher O'Brien was working. He was working in
Oh,
the retail store, which is directly across the street up West 45th Street. And that's how we became friends.
Okay, so the magnitude of that synchronicity
mm-hmm.
needs to be acknowledged. That is like this guiding light that is just making these events happen to you, because that's going to also help set the tone for you to digest all this stuff and have somebody to echo this stuff off of later. And he helped with your book. And it's just, that is a tremendous, like a massive synchronicity.
That
Totally.
is a massive synchronicity. And there was another one, which was meeting Robert Hastings at my university when I was studying electronic composition in the School of Music at Northern Illinois University. Robert Hastings, who wrote UFOs and Nukes, and he was just about to go on the road as an experiencer himself. He had been at Malmstrom Air Force Base in the control room where the radar was when UFOs showed up and the nuclear weapons went dark.
Oh,
Hmm.
And they
wow.
kicked him out of the control room and said, you shouldn't be in here. And he said, this stuff is going on and they're not telling us.
Hmm.
America needs to know. And he has been on the road since 1981. When I met him, he found me through my professor by walking into the music building and said, I need to find someone who can do some sound effects for me. And my professor said, call Lisa, she'll do sound effects for you.
Oh, whoa.
And we went into a synthesizer studio, and he would say things like, I need the sound of a UFO taking off at Mach 5.
Huh.
And I would make woo, 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 sounds for him, and I'd record them for him, and he'd be happy with them. And sometimes he'd ask me for sounds, and I'd make them. And then one time I slipped up and said, that's not how they sound. And he and
Well,
he
how do
went,
you know?
well, he went, what? You know something? And I went, no, never mind. And I zipped my lips, but we had this brief encounter where I was doing the sound effects, and he went on the road from 81 to 2017 which was a lot of years of going to lectures all over the world, especially all over the country, showing people that the US government is very well aware that UFOs are real, that they show up, they
Mm-hmm.
come and visit our nuclear sites, they monitor them, and he believes, as I believe, that nuclear weapons are a problem and believes that the UFOs are telling us nuclear weapons are a problem.
Mm.
Well, I didn't see him from about 1983 when I graduated. When I decided to get serious about putting the book out, it was 2017, and I wrote to him to find out if he remembered me because I wanted to mention how I nearly spilled the beans to him in 1981. And he did remember me. And at this point in our lives, we're very close friends. And he edited this book, so he was a big part of it, as was Christopher O'Brien. And I thought it
Okay.
was pretty amazing. And you are right. Synchronistically, both Christopher O'Brien and Robert Hastings, I met one in 1981, I met one in 1983, and neither of their careers had actually begun. And they both became renowned researchers and authors.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? And when it came time when either the guides or somebody sending me telepathic messages, it's time to get the book out. And I'm like, no, I don't want.
You have to
I
be
had already
seen.
I had already written it in 1994 and did not want to do that.
Mm.
And then I was getting these messages, I was resisting, and when I saw Christopher O'Brien on television, I said, "Oh man, that means I have to get the book out." There he is.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
realized that might be the first person that I could actually tell and share the first draft with, which I had copywritten in 1994.
Man, there's this like invisible guiding force that brought you all together
Hmm.
years
I
before things would blossom. And it's incredible to realize that at this point.
And I feel
just
like you finally got the support you needed, or people there who were researching the same kind of things that you had experienced as truth. So you had some kind of verifiable way of knowing I'm not crazy, or this isn't just some experience that only I'm having. This is a real thing that's going on in our country. So I think that's really synchronistic. You were given that support system.
I believe it was set up in the early 80s so that when I was really going to bring this story out, I would have the supports there waiting for me and
Hmm.
their careers and ours dovetailed together. And I introduced Chris to Robert Hastings later, and they became acquainted.
Oh, cool.
Chris actually lived in Crestone, which was pretty close to where Robert lives now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was a very interesting dovetail that it's as if Providence,
Hmm.
the amazing workings of creation set you up with what you need long before you know that you need it,
Yeah.
which is the wonderful thing about creation. But there's no teasing it out to one exact explanation. And I think living with we'll never know is something that when you study healing, they talk about the not knowing.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And it has been one of the biggest blessings, especially at the Brennan School, is to work with the not knowing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a wonderful perspective.
Totally.
You have to learn that you'll have to find peace without an answer because you look in the media, the word uncertainty comes up like, oh, it's a plague. Well, if you can learn to find your peace in not knowing, you'll get through quite a few things because life didn't promise us answers to everything. If we did, we'd be a lot smarter as a species
Yeah,
because
exactly.
we know everything.
Yeah. It's funny. I remember in my mid 20s, I was meditating in a bathtub. I remember exactly where I was. And this download came in, embrace the I don't knows. And I was like, oh my God, that's genius. And that was like my motto for a long time, just embrace everything I don't know. And I think that's a
Right.
good segue into the soulful send off here
Yeah.
because
Ooh.
your story you, since a young age, have been made to know or been aware of so much, but at the same time, it's brought as many or more questions than answers. And so there's so much that comes with all this that you don't know. But
True.
it's just it's a tremendous story. And the thing from my perspective, and probably the perspective of most people reading your book or listening to the podcast, is it's a story. But when I really sense into you and your experience, this is a tremendous life experience from a teenager who is being brought on spaceships, having their boyfriend change into a hologram. I mean, that's just like flipping the world and everything you knew for the first 14 years of your life upside down. And then you had to live in that world around people who haven't necessarily had their life flipped upside down. And it's a story of fear, just being shocked, but it's also a love story. It's your teenage love story. And so there's this powerful emotional energy in there and connection. And then there's this greater sense of purpose that your boyfriend's this intergalactic warrior who's doing these missions. And it's just a lot. There's so much to your story. And I'm very thankful for the stories you brought here on the podcast today. If anybody is like, wow, this has been tremendous, I want to know more, there is so much more in the book. It links a lot of these stories together, fills in a lot of gaps, answers probably some of your questions. There's more stories in there. So definitely go check out the book. But one of the things I want to acknowledge is in the book, at the end, you explore every perspective of people who can make this not so woo-woo. Like you could look at it this way or this way. You're extremely objective. And I love that you did that. I really, really have a lot of respect that you went through and acknowledged every naysayer's possible perspective. But I also love that within all that, there is a bunch of perspectives where you're like, well, you can't shut this one down. And those are some of the stories you told here today. It's just, you talk about at certain points how your own doubt went away because you doubted this, a lot at the beginning, especially. And reading through those appendices and even, your story in general, it takes the doubt away for me as the reader. And I thought that was really powerful. So to wrap this up, I just want to say that I know that this story for you carries so much power and energy. And I really hope that it's just providing tremendous soul growth for you. And it's a blessing in disguise, or even if it's not a disguise, somehow it's a blessing because I see the tragedy in it. I see the heartbreak. I see the tough times. But I also see that guiding force that put you in these synchronistic positions for you to be able to digest this. And I'm very grateful that you've had the last, was it been like 35 years or so, not dealing with this and being able to. Yeah, I mean, it could take lifetimes, who knows, but I'm glad that you got out and you've been able to live, I guess we'll call it a normal life to some extent, ever since, the end of that story. So
And now I work with guides and angels and archangels.
Awesome.
yeah, so maybe normal's still
joyful.
a stretch, but
Yeah.
it's a healing journey. So I'm very happy for that.
Yeah, totally. And
Thank you, Brandon.
oh, I'll
Thank you,
piggyback off of that.
Sophia.
Yeah, I want to reflect back to you, like, your courage is astounding. I mean, I know talking to you, reading the book's one thing, and talking to you and seeing your emotion and how you've had to process what happened and you lived through this. And so it just makes it so personal to hear your story and to know the trauma you went through, the journey you've been on to heal that. And it just, the courage that you bring here today to bring this story forward, to publish the book, to let people know and be so vulnerable, because there's a lot of things in the book, even that we didn't talk about here today, that are very private and are hard to talk about, hard to acknowledge, hard to tell people, and to be seen for the greater good of all, so that we can all know what's really going on. And whether, the viewers or listeners choose to believe it or not is totally their call, but we want to know the truth. And so people like yourself that have brought these stories forward, this is your life. And let us know, hey guys, there's this whole other world out there. Like there's this whole other agenda, or, just things going on.
More than meets the eye.
Yeah. So I just want to thank you from my heart to yours.
Thank you, Sophia.
Yeah. For your
Thank you.
courage.
I feel your essence, both of you.
So
It's so beautiful.
I have tears in my eyes because, I know it's not easy to relive those things either. And so it takes so much courage to show up here so that other people can hear the truth. So thank you.
And I'm grateful.
Thank
I'm
you.
grateful.
Yeah.
I know Tom Kenyon has
Okay.
been part of your journey. He's been part of mine, and I've been able to take your
Yes.
story and link it to lots of different things. Tom Kenyon, things medical medium have said, and so on and so forth, other stories, other authors. And
Yep.
it's just, I'm very grateful that you found us, that you're on our podcast, that you're sharing this, and that you're helping us on our journey by speaking your truth and sharing your journey.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your heartfelt words. It's such a comfort. Thank you. A healing moment.
Aspen Roots.
Visit us at aspenroots.love.